Well, hello there.
Howdy.
Welcome to Ergonomic Conversations. I'm your host, Andrew Clay Shafer, and as always, we're here to explore people working together with each other and with technology. Bryan is a passionate advocate for all the things, but currently refers to himself as a value stream architect. I'm going to take a trip down memory lane with Bryan. Before we get to what Bryan thinks, let's learn a little bit about why Bryan thinks that. So who is Bryan Finster and where did he come from?
I'm a value stream architect for defense unicorns, where we're trying to solve some of the really, really hard delivery problems. Think water-gapped environments. I've been a software developer since 1996 professionally. Started out in a medium-sized supply chain solutions company in Dallas. Worked there for about 6 years. Got laid off because of the dot-com bubble bursting. Moved to Bentonville, Arkansas.
That's when I went to Hayden grad school.
Yeah, that was a fun time. It's interesting trying to find a job, but I did find one just before my severance ran out in Arkansas. I was like, Arkansas? Do they wear shoes in Arkansas? And in early 2001, came work for Walmart and spent
20 years.
19 and a half years at Walmart. Just enough time to almost taste the permanent discount card. And then I got lured away to come try to help solve even harder delivery problems. Helping the warfighter get solutions to keep them alive is what I'm working on right now.
So there's a bunch of these kind of buzzwords in and around a lot of this work, and I think there'll be some things we could pull on these different stories. But let's play the buzzword Rorschach test.
All right.
So let's start with let's start with agile.
Oh yeah, that's what consultants sell to buy boats.
Well, that's a good start. We're off to a good start. So what about the scaled agile framework?
That's honestly, that like gives me like I might just go into fits. Let's see, scaled agile is terror, nightmares. Also a good way to buy boats.
Good way to buy boats. What about continuous delivery?
Oh, that's the only way anybody should ever work. That's the only way that you're ever going to be secure, that you're going to have quality, that you're going to be compliant. And it's the only way that developers can really live good lives.
Building on that, DevOps.
DevOps done correctly is the environment that allows continuous delivery to actually work because it's improving the entire flow of value. Done incorrectly, it's somebody building Jenkins pipelines.
And then we'll just keep it going, connected to that, platform engineering.
Platform engineering would be a subset of DevOps that focusing on improving the ability for developers to deliver value, making the easy thing the right thing to do, or the other way around, the right thing the easy thing to do, and to make the wrong things harder. Make it hard to make mistakes and easy to deliver value.
So let's get into the dialogue. I mean, I honestly think that everything you said, I basically agree with, right? But one of the things I'm a little confused about with the way some of the conversations is happening right now is if you were trying to do continuous delivery in microservices for the last 10 years, which is something that I've been trying to help people with for at least that long, longer actually.
Yeah.
Then like, how did you try to do that without a platform? Like, what were you doing this whole time?
Like me personally?
No, I mean, just as an abstract philosophical question.
Oh yeah. Well, people, they just kind of cobble together their own platforms, don't they? That's what I typically see is people go, oh, I need to do a thing. So they'll go and download.
But that's actually not wrong. Like what else could you possibly do? Right. Like that. But then when you think about the capabilities you need to manage scale, day two, all these things that you would want to do with a continuously delivered application, which is going to be more deployments in time. And then you go to microservices, which is going to be more deployments in space. And you haven't solved these problems with whatever the combination of buzzwords you need to rub on it is. Like that software that does all that stuff we just described, like that's a platform. Like that's what it should be.
Yeah, no, I agree. It should be everything to make it easy to manage all that stuff at scale. And I'll tell you, I talked to a team one time that they had working out how they're going to decompose their monolith into nano services after I talked to them about what they were trying to do, because I heard about them at a conference one time, and they couldn't even effectively operate their monolith. And they're about to make that 100 times worse because microservices are the thing to do. I'm like, yeah, they might be a thing.
I feel like the industry kind of has this cyclic belief that there's some magic thing that's going to solve things.
No.
When the first few hit me, I didn't realize that's what was happening. But now that we're kind of getting old, like I've seen a few phases of this, because I would almost argue this goes all the way back to at least object-oriented programming, right? Agile is another wave of it, where if we just do this one magic thing, like somehow this weird trick is going to make all these things go away.
Yeah, we have all these solutions, but the problems aren't well understood, which is a real problem, right? Because if you're just applying solutions to an unknown problem, how do you know the right solution?
This is the conversation I have all the time right now, is if you don't have the same preconditions as the organization that you're trying to copy their conference talk or blog post, then you can't expect the same outputs. It's not the same equation. So I really want to dig into, I think there's some fun stuff to talk about what I know you're working on now, but also for my own understanding and learning. And we had some of these conversations, like we see each other probably we missed the pandemic years, but before that we run into each other like at least once a year usually. So the time you spent at Walmart, you spent almost 20 years, like we said. And that was had to be like a very interesting time, because in the beginning of that story, the fraction of Walmart's business that was technically centered, e-commerce centered, or however you want to think about it, had to shift dramatically in that timeline.
Oh yeah, because it was 0%.
What's that?
It was 0% when I
Yeah, exactly. From zero to like basically an e-commerce behemoth to be, there's a few other things that we all know that are probably bigger, but they
imagine this: all of tech when I joined Walmart fit into the auditorium. It was about 1,100 people. When I left Walmart, it was closer to 19,000 people spread across the globe. And now it's accelerated even beyond that in the last 2 years since I've been gone. It's far bigger than that. I mean, it's just massive growth. And if you can imagine all of the change that has to happen for that to occur.
Oh, absolutely. I think there's some very interesting lessons that maybe we could explore there. And from the outside looking in, I remember going back over 10 years ago when Walmart started showing up to the Agile conferences, or Walmart started showing up to like the DevOps conferences. And you could kind of see from the outside looking in how that was transforming some of the stuff they were trying to do.
And it, like everything else, it goes in waves. I spoke for the first time at DevOps Enterprise Summit in 2017, and we were just beginning a journey of using continuous delivery as a way to improve engineering excellence and business delivery, right? Using CD as the tool to uncover the problems so they can be solved. And we were just at the beginning of that. And, fast forward, leadership changes and a new cycle starts where it's like, oh no, that's too dangerous. It's amazing to see this, and frustrating to see this happening, and not in organization after organization. The thing I've learned, by the way, about going to conferences is that every organization has got pockets. If they're speaking on stage, they have a pocket in their organization that's at least on the journey to doing things well. and some of their talks are aspirational or where they want to go. And when you talk to them about the reality, it's pockets, and we still have a bunch of dumpster fires everywhere. I think too many people go to conferences and think, wow, we're just really far behind and we can never catch up. No, everybody's far behind. I think it's really important for people to know.
Everything looks bad on the inside, I think, is the lesson I've learned over the years. And like you said, whatever's on the stage is the best possible.
That's the best possible thing. Yeah.
Send a best dress, like show up and kind of put on whatever like the projected vision of the thing is. It's not the way that everything always works.
Plus, no publicly traded company is going to let you go up there and tell like what the bad parts are.
No, of course. So in that like front row seat watching, and you kind of had various levels. Like first, I want to shout out to an idea that I've been trying to kind of crystallize, but every time I share this idea, I get some more understanding. And it really goes back to the beginning of, I usually start the story with kind of Deming and socio-technical systems, because they both started in the 50s. So you have these, what I'll consider historic, or maybe it's just the time and place where they wrote it down, and that's where I get into the stream of consciousness. But the Tavistock Institute comes up with this notion of socio-technical systems and the need to optimize the technology investment in conjunction with the social practices around it.
Mm-hmm.
And that goes back to the 50s, and their research shows that these horizontally integrated autonomous teams have more productivity, better safety, and better morale than over automated teams that have like very strong silos and don't work well together across the silos, which is like the same story that we keep telling. But then the thing, and this is kind of related to your comment about the change of leadership, and I'm not sure we figured it out anytime soon, given the history of it, but basically they put that research out there, and it gets to the directors, and they're like, no way, we're not doing that. We're not going to empower the workers. That's not what we're doing.
Yes, I've been very, very fortunate. And that research you're talking about, I had never read any of that, never studied any of it. But we discovered that along the way when we started piloting continuous delivery and logistics at Walmart. And the reason I was very fortunate was because, and I actually had drinks with him last night, our SVP, Randy Sally, at the time. He was one of those leaders who did empower people. And, you were talking about SAFE earlier. We had been using SAFE for a couple of years, and it had accomplished the thing SAFE is really good at, which was creating more jobs, to manage process instead of actually delivering better. And we needed to deliver better. And so what he did was he put us engineers in charge of trying to figure that out. And, we started piloting continuous delivery with, it was me and my partner in crime, Patrick Nolan. And Patrick was really focusing on, okay, we're going to build a self-service Jenkins platform, basically, something where we have templates the teams can just consume, so the teams don't have to do everything. And so he built a team of like 3 people and did that. And then I was focusing on how do we actually use this platform effectively. And I got on one of the first teams as tech lead to learn how to do CD, because I didn't know either. And we were growing how do we use the tools to effectively accomplish the goals we're after while we're growing the tools at the same time. And, as a system together. And, at the end of, when we were finally getting some success, Patrick and I talked about that, about how important it was that if we tried to do the process without the tools, or implemented the tools without the process, that either one would have been either disastrous or frustrating. And later on, when we had a new director come in who wanted all teams to be doing continuous delivery by Q1, which meant just roll out pipelines to them. They didn't have to do any learning. It proved to be pretty bad.
Yeah, this is a conversation I end up having over and over. And the way that I try to frame this is you have to onboard, like whatever the buzzword is, cloud or platform, DevOps, whatever. you have to onboard the workflow as much as the workload.
Yeah.
It's not enough to build this like one-time proof of concept if you haven't got the workflow, and that means the people who do the actual work aligned to use that tool. And this is the core lesson that goes back to this Tavistock Institute studying the coal mining, that it's a joint optimization. It's not a separate system. The social system and the tools are not a separate system. It's one system. It's a social technical system, and you have to optimize those in conjunction with each other. You can't just lay down the tools and hope for the best and get good outcomes. So just for my understanding, what year was that, and kind of like what was the scope and scale that got to?
So we started on this effort in 2015, and we've been doing the agile, but and it wasn't just lay out pipelines and start trying to learn how to do CD, because it started with, we have to reorganize the teams around the new architecture we're going to need, because when you have a 25 million line entangled monolith with just nightmare system, you can't just shift that to continuous delivery. You're going to have to start peeling it apart. And so we started use DDD to design the teams that we're going to need for the new subproducts of the system. And you're talking about a system that was being supported by about 400 developers. So we started peeling off those first teams, and then started learning how to do CD on those first teams that were those sub capabilities of the system.
Yeah, it's really interesting.
Yeah.
And then another thing that we had a lot of conversations about that I think would be interesting to talk about is, I think there's an open source project at some point that you start getting really into the metrics of the flow metrics and some of the other stuff that was happening with the.
So when one of the, I told you that when that first talk in 2017, we were focusing on using CD as the method for improvement. What we had started doing in 2016 was we had Jason Van Zyl join, and he started working on, we're going to build a centralized delivery platform. So we had a massively federated thing of, teams. We were either using homegrown systems, or there's people using Anthill Pro, or there's a whole bunch of Jenkins instances out there. And we were going to pull it all together into one centralized platform that was a delivery platform that was optimized for making CD the right thing to do. And we were going to had the CTO put a challenge out there that said, I need every team to be able to deliver to production daily. And so we had to instrument that. We had to be able to tell how, whether we were meeting that goal or not, but we also needed to incentivize teams and show them how they were doing, because at scale, you can't just say, go do that and not give them any help at all. And so helping.
I mean, you can, people do.
You can, but part of that was and this was Jason's innovation, which there's parts of it that are good and parts of it that are bad, and it just depends on how you apply it. But we took Hygeia, which Capital One put together, and I've been using Hygeia in logistics for a year or so, just to keep an eye on our pipelines, make sure our pipelines are green. But what Jason did was he brought Hygeia in and then started adding scoring, like star ratings to different aspects of the dashboard. So, if you were doing trunk-based continuous integration, and you had, we wanted people to use branch and pull, because for compliance, because it's SOX, you need verified code review. But if you had branches that lasted less than 24 hours, you're integrating to the trunk, at least daily, then you get 5 stars. If you had a short build that was stable, you get 5 stars. If if you're deploying very frequently, you get 5 stars. And so we were using the metrics as a way to incentivize the behaviors we wanted. That can be effective if the teams care, and early adopters absolutely cared. They were bragging about how good their star ratings were, and then giving us feedback on things that were causing poor incentives, so that we could go and then tweak what the dashboard was
to improve the game, basically.
To improve the game, yeah. When I joined Platform, I was the product owner for the metrics dashboard, so I was the game master. It was my job to make sure that we were operating the game correctly. And that it also did a great job of the middle making them really want to know more about how to do this continuous delivery thing, which ultimately led to them asking me to start a dojo so we could directly help teams one-on-one with the struggles of why can't we CD? And then the laggards, it made them CD curious. I feel like I'm a bad person.
But I think there's a lot of language that's very interesting here. And I'd like to explore this divide that some people have between CI and CD.
Yeah.
And the relationship. And in particular, I feel like there's a lot of organizations that tried to go to CD by skipping CI. And it doesn't end well. So just maybe we could riff on kind of testing and how do you incentivize that, or how you think about that problem.
Well, I'll tell you how I got incentivized into it. So when we started this journey in logistics, all the testing was 100% manual. We did have a big offshore vendor working on an end-to-end test suite for the system, but that's never going to work. It's, especially at that scale, no test data management, this giant thing. The failure surface area is way too big.
And the incentives aren't aligned right when you do that setup.
Yeah, 100%. And we were delivering 3 to 4 times a year, usually late, always with scheduled war rooms that lasted for 24 hours a day for at least a week, sometimes more, to clean up the mess after every pilot. And so we could stabilize that release and then start rolling out across the chain. And the challenge that was put to us was, we want to do that every 2 weeks. That's the problem they wanted us to solve. And so that's when we really started digging into continuous delivery. And so I'm sitting there, we're laying out, okay, what problems do we need to solve first? I actually took the maturity model from the book Continuous Delivery, laid it out into a dependency diagram. I started laying out which things were tools, which things were process, and which things were tools enabled by process. I color-coded the whole thing, right? It all came down to, I need to do CI, and to do CI better, we need to do behavior-driven development, right? And so we started, okay, first we need to learn BDD. And, but the thing that came to me, right, was that, okay, I'm on call. You want me to push untested code to the trunk. I mean, it's like, if we're going to do this the way we're doing it now, we're going to push untested code to the trunk and ship it. I will never sleep again, right? And so like, okay, we really have to dig into this testing thing, because it has to be tested code. It can't just be code. And we need to make sure it's tested well so that we can sleep at night, and we're going to, because this is actually a quality initiative, not a speed initiative. We're trying to improve quality. And so we had to dig in and actually learn how to test. And then we had to go and learn how to architect tests so that they were stable and fast. We were really looking at pipeline cycle times and trying to keep that short, and optimizing our pipelines not for feature delivery. We're optimizing our pipelines for support. If I need to fix something at 3 o'clock in the morning, how do I fix that fast, safely, right?
So just a quick comment. In my own personal journey and understanding, I had a bit of an allergic reaction to agile process wonkery, like focused on having these rituals and having these meetings.
Oh no! So let me tell you.
But I fell in love with, I fell in love with agile engineering practices, starting with that you can't really have confidence and build with confidence until you can reproducibly rebuild everything from source and test it, and then get into this cycle with the XP TDD stuff. And that's something I fell in love with really early as a developer. I've evolved a little bit since then, which is another interesting conversation to maybe have. But the like, I see these organizations where someone told them that they needed to like maximize their deployment frequency, but they have no tests, and then they wonder why everyone's on fire all the time.
Yeah, it's because they don't understand the problem. But and to your point about agile process, number one, we were never taught any of the agile development practices. We were only taught the agile process, right?
I mean, when we say agile, most of the time, what we're talking about is like the most tepid version of Scrum.
Scrum, yeah, and especially and Scrum with safe is even worse. But when we started on that journey, I was like, okay, look, we've got all this heavy process overhead. There's no possible way we can meet our goal for CD because, again, Randy wanted us to do it every 2 weeks. When Patrick and I started digging into it, we're like, we should really go for daily because Jez says if it hurts, do it more. And we have a lot of hurt, so we need to do it a lot, right? And so we went for daily. And so I said, okay, well, we can't deliver daily with all this heavy process. And so I just told the team, it's like, okay, look, we're going to start with 0 process. And then we'll start adding on, and that's what we did. We just, because Randy would give us the air cover, and we also had a really good senior director at the time, and Kim would listen to us. And so I just said, we're going to start with 0 process and add on only the things that add value.
I love it. I love it. And I got this from Alistair, so I'll give credit to Alistair Coburn. But one of the things he kind of talks about, and I don't know if you know Alistair, but he's one of the people signed the Agile Manifesto and has
I haven't met him. I've seen him around, like on
like this discussion around a minimum viable process, right?
Yeah, that's actually I also coined that. I hadn't seen that before. And I said,
we talked about that like 2008 or 9 in Utah. So like we were always talking about that kind of stuff. So getting to the point where you have because like his point is that it's not one size fit all, and you have context, and maybe this is an interesting way to segue into some of the other stuff that you're doing now, which is the context that you have when you're trying to put we'll say the cat pictures on the internet problem, big web startup-y stuff at Flickr is qualitatively different than things where you're trying to manage transactions and people's money's on the line, which then is qualitatively different than things where people's lives are on the line. And the minimum viable process for one end of that spectrum is probably different than when you get towards the end of it, where there's nation state security interests involved, right? And that's,
I mean, really what it comes down to is what's the definition of safe to release, and then we automate everything possible, and then everything else is okay. What's the minimum process for everything else we need to do, right? And but absolutely right. I mean, you're not really super secure, super worried about your supply chain for cat photos. Where I was working with the Air Force last year, and the pipelines there are really locked down on when it comes to security vulnerabilities. They just won't let anything through, and so you're spending 40% of your week just resolving new CVEs all the time.
So moving into those kind of environments, is there anything that you revisited that you thought was true, and then it made like the new context changed how you think about some of these other problems?
No, I think it's just the engineering solutions for them. So I think the hardest problem is, some of the problems that my company is trying to solve right now is, CD to air gapped environments. So you're talking about sneakerware pipelines, right? You're having to burn things to hard media and transport them, which is very similar to, the way that software used to be delivered, where you like burn it to a CD and then buy it at the store. But you can still do CD that way. But I think the challenge people have is they think continuous delivery means that it's running in production, every single commit, and that's a solution for a problem. But really, the goal is not running in production every single commit. It's how fast can we get feedback to quality issues, right? And so, depending on your delivery context, how do you engineer the ability to get the best feedback possible to increase your confidence, and when it does deliver to the end user, that has minimum quality issues.
So this is the language and metaphors I started using to talk about this, and I'd be curious how you think about the way I explain this. But you never really have continuous anything if you study physics and you get into quantum mechanics, then you start to see that things are discontinuous at this really low level. So it's not so much continuous. It's like, what's the proper quanta of delivery, and that gets into all these things you could talk about with microservices, and that right now there's this kind of pendulum swing away from microservices, which is also interesting. But like, what's the incremental quanta of delivery, and then related to the sneaker net and kind of the dependency problem is what I like to think of, and I learned this from other people, is pace layers. So there's a natural cadence for how things should change. And you can do things to maybe speed them up or slow them down. But if you think about software and kind of like this delivery model of the software is on top of the stack, that's whatever middleware platformy thing in the thing, and then underneath that's infrastructure. The natural cadence for infrastructure to change is slower than the platform, which is slower than the software. So your software delivery might be once a day or more, or whatever, or maybe less because your context. But your platform's probably going to change a little slower than that, and you're not going to continuously deploy your storage array, or you could argue you do, but the quanta and in like time and space that you're going to change those things is going to be different.
Yeah, there's diminishing returns, right? Yeah. I mean, you could do CI to the point where every line of code runs through the pipeline, but there's diminishing returns. I mean, what's the value in doing that? Now, there's a presentation I give where I've got this slide where I talk about what we're trying to do with CD, and I talk about every haystack has a needle, right? It's just bigger haystacks have more needles on them, so you're building smaller haystacks. But at what point do you want to just ship a piece of straw? I mean, there is cost in running a pipeline. It's just that it drops the cost to the point where you can ship, 4 hours of work at 2 hours of work or whatever at a reasonable at a cost that's makes that a viable option, right? But
so again, and this is way my brain strings and connects and jumps around, but and you use the value stream moniker in your title, and you're doing some other stuff related to that. When you can frame this stuff in terms of, like, maybe not always dollars, but like some economic framing, the thing that I'm trying to do, and the way I think about it with like whatever the CI, automation, DevOps platform, whatever, is I want to reduce the fixed cost of a deployment. I want to reduce the fixed cost of verifying some system properties. And if you haven't reduced that cost, and then you start to do that thing more, then you just exploded so it's not just diminishing returns, it's probably negative return.
The reason that what you do is you don't do it more. You try to do it more and then find out where your cost is coming from so you can drop the cost. When like that original pilot, we still had manual change control, and it took 3 days to go through the change control process on every single change. And it was an onerous process. As the tech lead on the team, I just ate all of the pain instead of just delegating, hey, go do the change control. I was like, no, you guys are busy. I'll do the change controls. But I knew that was coming to an end because we were about to automate that. We were about to get the automated change control in the pipeline, and then we could lower the cost of change, right? Because, I mean, just 3 days of my time, just imagine the cost of that. To what value, right? Because it was mostly a rubber stamp anyway. And, once we lowered that cost, then we went to daily or more frequently deploying. It became negligible to get cost out. And then to get change out. And then the cost of getting feedback was almost nothing because we had a Slack channel open to a distribution center to the people who were doing our beta testing, doing live, not really beta because they were beta. They were live and using it live in the distribution center, but it was a subset of users. And they would you
probably watched this in the arc of the time you spent, in the employer that you had for almost 20 years. That what happened in so many enterprises is these processes that they evolved and still have in some cases. Were born in a world where some of these IT decisions were on the order of at least thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars to like change this thing, provision this thing, buy this thing. in the world we live in now, the actual cost of a container is on the order of pennies. And so you have these, but these processes we're still using in some cases. We're born in this world where the return to manage that decision is not in proportion to the investment.
Well, and there's all these habits in general, right? It's like I see people spend all these hours debating, decisions about something that it's not a big deal. If we decide to change it, it'll take us, half an hour or a day to change, depending, and we can just go change it. I mean, it's so easy to change software. Just deliver something and find out, instead of just polishing and hoping, and is this the right decision? I mean, just look at the effort of change, and then based on the time you spend on decisions on that, replacing your database, you might want to spend more time on it. But I mean, what shape should this icon be? I don't know, ship it.
Yeah, there's some tipping point in the information you get back for the effort to do it, and then the risk, the threat, and the risk model. So the work you're doing now, just for people who may or may not be as familiar, I think it's kind of interesting to talk about. And I had a line of sight to watch some of this from some of the places I worked on, but how the Department of Defense and some of these other things have evolved over really, I'd probably say the last 5 years intently, maybe 10 years, you could argue. But things like Platform One, Kessel Run, there's some different personalities involved. But maybe just lay out the landscape of how that is. And you recently got involved, but I know you work with a bunch of people that kind of have been through a lot more of that story. So set up the work you're doing now with the Defense Unicorns.
Yeah, so with Defense Unicorns, we're working on building out a suite of products to make it far easier to manage these air gap systems. We've got an open source product called Zarf that you can package up a complete Kubernetes runtime, and that could be mission applications that are doing something, or it could be a complete development environment, including all of the dependencies that you have approved, what you're trying to develop on. Package it up into one artifact and ship it to an air gap, ship it to a skiff, ship it to a submarine, and then spin it up with no knowledge of Kubernetes and run it, right? And this is a really hard problem to solve. I mean, you're not going to get a Kubernetes administrator on a submarine, right? That's just not going to happen.
Maybe eventually.
Well,
some of those submarines are pretty big.
They have other things that they're really focusing on. But solving problems like that. But what are the real problems? The government, I used to joke, well, I still do a little bit, that Walmart really uniquely prepared me for working around government, because it's not that different. The biggest problem I see that's the difference between, the bureaucracy is very similar. You're going to have politics just like you will in federal government. But the big challenge I see, particularly with the DoD, is that they have planned obsolescence for leadership. If you're in a big organization, a big enterprise, it's very common to see, CTOs or VPs stick around for 3 or 4 years, but sometimes they stick around for a lot longer than that, right? And having leadership continuity is really important if you're trying to make big change. I proposed a new metric we should be tracking: mean time to leadership change. If your improvement effort is longer than your MTTLC, you may want to reconsider doing it. But in the government, if you're an officer in charge of a command, you're only going to be there for 2 or 3 years tops, and then you're forced to leave, because it's up or out.
And so help me understand what you think the impact of that is.
Well, the lack of continuity. Every senior leader has their own agenda. And if they don't agree with the previous agenda, or they need to make a splash, right? It's like, what am I?
In many ways, they're almost incentivized not to agree with the
Exactly.
previous regime.
Exactly. And so it's really hard to have that level of continuity required to get real change done. And then there's a lot of, and then in the civil service, it's very common. I mean, the incentives in the government are aligned towards avoidance of risk. So status quo is the way that you make sure you get retirement. And so you have to be a real rebel. There's the people that we help defense unicorns, we call them mission heroes, because you have to have that kind of level of heroism, of self-sacrifice, because you're trying to drive change in your organization, and it's hard. I mean, I was doing that at Walmart, and I talked to Gene Kim one time, and he said you have to have a certain level of not caring about the consequences to do this kind of work. I'm like, yeah, that's true. I've been personally impacted by trying to help Walmart. And
we probably promised more focus on this heroism topic, the way the title was framed. But like, this is an interesting thing to think about and talk about, which is the need for heroism to some degree.
Yeah, shouldn't need it.
And then, I mean, like, based on what you just said, for someone to really make progress in some of these roles, they have to be willing to put their self on the line for that cause.
They may be recognized for it, but they may be punished for trying.
No, absolutely, and that's the second thing, which is the cost of heroism.
Yeah,
both individually and I would wager, having watched some of these stories, that the heroes aren't always right, and like maybe some are super villains actually.
That's true, but I think it all comes down from the same motivation. This is what's motivated me my entire career. Everything I've tried to improve has been, I just can't tolerate this pain, right? And it could be just minor things. It's like, I can't tolerate the fact that this code is randomly indented. I can't read the code. I have to fix this, right? I can't tolerate the fact that there's no logging in this application. These are real problems I've had to solve, by the way. It's like, I can't tolerate this daily pain that's like, it's like nagging at me, and I'm trying to do my job and it's causing friction. I can't tolerate it. And so I really think that that's where the mindset comes from people that are trying to make things better. It's like, look, I know that we can make this better, and I have an idea how, and we're going to drive it through.
But related to how you set this up, I actually think there's a divide between people who are trying to make things better objectively for everyone, and people who are trying to make things better for themselves. And as a consequence, when you start thinking about the leaders and the agendas that they project into some of these organizations, that's a pretty bright line to me. And the rewards, you almost called this out a minute ago. You don't always get rewards from making things better for everyone.
No, that's true. I mean, it's at some point you're self-motivated. I tell people I'm on a personal mission to make every developer's life better, because most of my development career has been very, very painful.
And to that point, I've seen a lot of people get promoted, get rewarded for managing the politics more than delivering anything that made anyone's life better or removed any pain from anything.
Or I've personally experienced, people getting promoted for delivering something that on paper looked really good, but it was delivered by walking over the bodies of developers, and it was an incredibly fragile system that required heroics to keep up and running.
But in the game theory, they won.
Yeah, they won because they got a promotion.
So what do we do with that?
Assassination's illegal, right?
I think in most countries under the Geneva Convention or what have you.
Yeah. At some point you have to find, I don't know. I mean, it's everywhere, right? I mean, that's just human nature. There's some people who will do whatever it takes to get ahead, and there's some people who actually have pride in what they do, right? And I'm not going to stop having pride in what I do because the world's not fair, and some people get ahead for walking over the bodies of other people. I will do everything I can in my power to point it out and tell them that they're evil, and shine a bright spotlight on it. I mean, I couldn't do it when I was, a senior engineer at, the relatively low level position in a big enterprise, but I can now, and I will.
So I used to get very, very frustrated by this thing that is apparently the way that humans have operated since the beginning of time. And I got frustrated for some of the same things, and like this notion of getting ahead and doing things and being true to yourself was a struggle in my own kind of internal dialogue. But one of the things that got me to where I think about it now is just like the absolute reality of political necessity.
Mm-hmm.
And there's this quote from Plato that says, if you refuse to participate in politics, then you'll always be ruled by your inferiors. And
Yes.
and so I try to get people to realize, like, it doesn't do you or any of these other people that you want to help to kind of like mope about the fact that there's all these political things that have to be navigated to get to the outcome. Like, you have to do it.
Yeah, my friend Scott Nasello.
That's not to say that I'm good at that, by the way.
No, I know, but I mean that's the thing, right? Is that at a certain level, if you're going to try to improve things more broadly, then my IDE works better. You're going to have to learn how to be manipulative of people who are bad, right? You need to help the people that are good and manipulate the people that are bad, and it's just frankly what it is. And find what those people need and make sure that the right path gives them some benefit, because all they're interested in is their own benefit. And I was talking to I met Scott Nasello when he was at Columbia Sports. He's at eBay right now. And I was having beer with Scott, and he said, Bryan, we shouldn't have gone to school for engineering. We should have gone to school for psychology, because we're trying to hack the biggest undocumented API. And I've never forgotten that phrase. I've used it in many talks. We're trying to hack the biggest undocumented API. It's like as engineers trying to make things better, you're not spending enough time on soft skills if you're not focusing on it. How to, learning what people need and trying to figure out how to communicate the right thing to do in a way that fulfills that need.
So I didn't pay you to say that, but the framing that I really have fallen in love with, which I learned from Jabe, who I work with now, is, and it goes to dev and ops and platforms and the rest of this, is that there's all these selfish interests. Mm-hmm. Everyone has some selfish interests, right? So whatever persona, whatever role, pick a game you want to play. There's always some way to win that, and the selfish interest in doing so. And to me, the core like dev and ops divide, the core conflict between dev and ops is best resolved when the work is aligning their selfish interests with the collective interests.
Yeah.
And that's really what this investment in DevOps automation, platform, whatever you want to call it, is about. Getting the selfish interests of developers, operators, security, compliance, pick the other people, product managers, obviously, and hopefully at some point customers. Although not every, like you just mentioned, not every software thing is about running a business. Sometimes there's other missions you gotta serve.
Always a user.
Yeah, those selfish interests are aligned with the collective interests. That's the magic beauty of a platform, DevOps, whatever you want to call it, is that it keeps promises and serves those interests for all the different groups.
Well, and this comes back to something we touched on earlier on, which is all these solutions, right? And we're aligning people, but to what problem? Right. And one of the, my boss posted a thing about what's your, your, as a normal human, what's your superpower? And my superpower is boiling things down to even I can understand them. And so I have come up with a simple way to frame what the real problem is we're trying to solve. Right. Number one, we're doing product development. It's not software development. It's product development. No matter what it is you're doing, whether you're doing it correctly or not, it's still product development. But with product development, the problem we're trying to solve is the requirements are wrong, or we have misunderstood them during implementation, or the need changes before we can deliver. This is the problem we're trying to solve. And so what we're trying to do is engineer a way to go from idea to end user and get feedback as fast as possible so that we can be minimally wrong, ultimately less wrong over time.
So I have a little semantic nitpick that I will probably start more arguments with. I think we had a little bit of this conversation on LinkedIn that like I think we should be specific about what a product is,
Mhm.
and like what are we trying to do? Because to me, and this is semantic argument in a sense, is a product implies someone will buy it. And
How about
a
what
lot of
if we said,
software, what's that?
what if we said a product is something that delivers value to the end user?
Well, the reason I think this is important is you just don't have the same dynamics, because you could argue that there's all these other words that mean that too, right? Like what is the design process? What is design thinking, right? Like all these things are about improving something for someone, so creating some value for something.
Yeah.
But to me, product, and talking specifically through the lens of like product market fit, is a different dynamic that you're trying to drive in a market where there's all these other things that's competing with. And you just don't have that same Darwinian pressure in a lot of projects, and particularly when you get into the government space. So if it's a step forward for an organization to use the word product, because it makes it like tickles some neurons that get people thinking that there should be some feedback loop to improve the system, that's a step forward. But there's some fundamental dynamics that those projects don't necessarily have that I think a product needs to be successful.
Yeah, I've thought more about that because we've had this conversation before,
Yeah.
and I've thought about that, and I don't want to give people that out, right? Because all I've developed, well, that's not true. The first job I had was, modifying our core system for customers like Sun Microsystems and Whole Foods and customers like that, right? So we were, but they had already purchased the product. I was just modifying it. Okay. Other than that, it's all been internal customers. I've never developed software for sale other than, doing customizations on what we already sold. But the fact of the matter is that you still have to have that customer-centric mindset for the guy in the distribution center who's trying to earn his bonus and feed his kids.
This is the semantics. This is the semantics. It's like they're not your customer, right? Like you need empathy for them, but they're not buying, right? Because you don't have this product market fit, J curve to infinity. If you're perfect building those pipelines, building these platforms.
To be pedantic, you're correct, but I think that going back to hacking people, okay, if you don't think of them that way, then you won't act that way, and you need to act that way.
I'm all in favor of thinking that these are people and that we're trying to design things for people.
But if you don't have that, if you don't think of them as your customers, as people that you need to deliver value to, right, then you can start having you start having the wrong habits.
I mean, I somewhat disagree, and I see a lot of counterexamples where I think people have, like, under the guise of being the product manager for some internal tool, are starting to optimize for their tool's existence more than they are for those people. And
that's not a counterexample. You're supporting my argument.
To me, here's my main point, and then we can go to a different topic, which is if you need to, in your own mental model, say that is a customer for you to do something that will improve their life, then by all means call them a customer. I just don't have that prerequisite in my own mind. And I think that other people would benefit from thinking about this as a system that we all have collective interest in optimizing.
Yeah, and I don't disagree with you. I think that there's, and also to your point, they could be that, well, and people do this with product all the time anyway. Even if you are selling it, they optimize what the customer wants instead of what the customer needs.
They optimize. Yeah, there's so many other little rabbit holes.
So you can get bit either way, but I think at the end of the day, what it comes down to is like, look, you are helping somebody, or you're just writing code. Pick one.
Yes. Well, help people is support the collective outcome of this mission.
Yeah. So either help people or have a hobby. But if you're a professional software engineer, your job is to solve problems for other people, not to just push code out and go, yeah, I'm done.
So part of what I'm trying to get people in organizations to think about is the statement you just made is true for every persona.
Mm-hmm.
If you're security, if you're compliance, your job is to help people.
Help people, yes.
Help the people.
Yeah, and
help the people in the building and help the people out of the building.
If you're security and compliance, your job is to find ways to help the people who are on the pointy end of the spear, pushing change out to the end users to make their job easier so that they can be safe and compliant without increasing their cognitive load.
Well, yeah, but it's the balance too, because if you're optimizing only for the minimized like cognitive load, then maybe there's some other promises you can't keep. So you're trying to balance that with the risk in the threat model.
Oh yeah, but I mean, how much of that can we take off of them? How much of that can we platformize? And how much of that can we
a lot more than we seem to have so far.
I know, right? And the thing is that the whole manual security and compliance thing means we're paying people to write fan fiction.
You don't like the theatrical performances?
I mean, it's entertaining and it slows things down and increases batch sizes, but other than that, it doesn't actually make us secure or compliant.
So this is something we didn't bring up till now, and I got really onto this train and excited about it from conversation with John Willis.
Yeah.
But there's, especially in these regulated environments, which you have a lot of experience with, that there's this toil on the front side to do the kind of compliance theater work for the developers to do anything in the first place, and then there's toil on the backside when you do the audit theater. And
the audit just catches failures. It doesn't prevent problems.
I mean, there's so much, like this is where you get into this conversation about the difference between security and compliance, right? And on some level, all you're really doing is asserting or attesting that you did what you said you would. It doesn't mean that you didn't do other things in some cases, or that you weren't, unsecure all the time, including right now.
Yeah, and and this is I wrote a chapter. There's a Mark Miller put together an anthology called Modern Cybersecurity: Tales from the Near Distant Future, and I was asked to write a chapter on that. And I was talking about how if you don't have continuous delivery and you don't have security and compliance wired into your pipelines, you're neither secure nor compliant. It's every change has to be secure and compliant. Not we passed audit this quarter, or 3 years ago when we did a security scan, everything was fine.
This goes to the heart of what we were just saying a minute ago. If you put it on every developer to make that determination that this is secure and compliant, then there's no way they can be an expert in whatever other business or like mission domain that they need to be successful. So
no, 100%. And the other thing I talked about there is that businesses, and I consider security and compliance to be quality, just like functional quality, right?
I call it illities and itities, right? Like
yeah, and the thing that I have a talk called, how to misuse and abuse DORA metrics. I talk about this in that chapter in that book about how organizations are betting their business plans on developers becoming hobbyists and how to test better and how to write secure code.
Not just hobbyists, like world-class
hobbyists. It's like
world-class hobbyists.
Yeah. They're betting their business plan on us going, hey, I really want to learn more about this. And then also us finding good information on it.
This is a core assumption I find in a lot of organizations where they just assume like whoever they've hired as developers like are going to be experts in all this stuff. And so they should magically like be good. They should have done it right. Like, why do we have technical debt? Like we should just like not do that.
No, and John Willis, I had him come give a talk about compliance as code at Walmart in, I think, 2019 for our community practice around CD. And, trying to introduce that concept is, how do we codify the rules for SOX and bake them into the pipeline so that developers don't have to they shouldn't even have to know about them until it fails. The same with security. How do we bake all this stuff in the pipeline so that I don't, it's like the pipeline will teach me how to be a secure coder because it'll fail when I don't. Right.
It will certainly help.
It doesn't scale to go and individually teach people all these things and then hope that they remember them because they're under delivery pressure. They're not under security pressure.
Absolutely. Every developer is always making a choice between doing things right and doing things right now.
Right.
And they have a lot more pressure for right now in most organizations.
Yeah. Well, I had a situation once where we were this, again, this is where we had already built up a quality runway. We were really good at testing and had a new leader come in and say that we had a big effort we were going after, a whole bunch of teams working on this. And he pulled us all into a conference room. It's like, hey, I really appreciate all the effort you're putting into testing, but we really need to make this date. So you don't need to do that anymore.
Yeah, you don't need to test anymore because we're gonna just ship it on the day.
Yeah. I stood up and asked him if I could say a few words. And I took the microphone from him and I said, we're still going to test. We'll never make the date. And then I sat back down.
How did that goes back to the politics question.
He was,
pretty happy about that, I imagine.
My manager reported to him.
And that's how you got promoted.
I guarantee you that is not true. But you know what? We made the date.
Magic.
Yeah. We didn't give up on our testing.
But was there some heroism involved?
Yeah. There was 16, 18-hour days involved because there was an expanding scope, shrinking. This, I tell a story about, us growing this great capability to be able to deliver to production, 5 times, 10 times a day, get feedback from the distribution center, had high team morale, really good quality, and then put on a death march and burned it all down, and all the high performers left the area and or the company.
On that happy note, and I feel like there's a lot more stories to tease out of you, and we'll have to have you come back in a month or two. I just have a lot of respect for you you're like a working person who gets their hands in the mud and like make stuff happen. And then you also have all this energy to put into some of these like creative projects. So I think it'd be fun to spend a couple minutes talking about some of and we were talking about this before we started the show, but you have a couple of websites people can check out. SADMF is one of my favorite ones, so maybe you should talk about that. And then the minimum CD and how people can kind of take advantage of that and get involved in some of those things you're already.
Let's do minimum CD first because it's the one I care. Actually, I care about them both. About
that you're actually serious about.
Yeah, but it's the one I'm actually serious about. So minimum CD is the outcome of. I'd read one too many LinkedIn posts about we're doing continuous delivery because we deliver on demand once a month. They could deliver more frequently, but our customers don't want it more than or hearing stories about people getting continuous delivery banned in their organization because they weren't focusing on quality, they're focusing on speed. Again, it's that we have Jenkins pipelines. And so we were at DevOps Enterprise Summit Virtual in 2020. And I came to the bar and there's a group of people there and I started just griping about it. And we started comparing notes on it and decided, what we could do is, what if we put together a list of behaviors that you could say binary, yes, we're doing this, or no, we're not doing this, that would be the definition of the minimum for safe continuous delivery that would be true in any environment. So whether you're pushing cat photos to the web or delivering to a submarine, we even had Rosalind Radcliffe come by and talk to her about, do these align to mainframe? We were pulling in everybody we could to compare notes on this. And, 3 days later, we released a markdown document on GitHub that was minimum viable continuous delivery. Then started soliciting signatures. Hey, do you agree with this? Give us feedback. How do we improve this? And a week later, we got a pull request from Dave Farley with a slight language tweak in his signature. Michael Nygaard signed on to it. Rosalind, of course, signed on to it. Courtney Kistler signed on to it. We've got all these, people who've agreed and signed on to it. At this point, we've got 45 different people who've contributed in some way or another to the page. We've got, we just passed 200 signatures. I have to go back and look. The number keeps growing. I mean, I get pull requests all the time. We're translated into multiple languages.
And you mentioned, some prominent vendors or whatever. We'll kind of like reference it
Well, yeah. So actually, I've been invited next week to speak at the Dora community that Google hosts, and one of the organizers at Google says she references it all the time. I get feedback all the time from people that I've had people tell me that's a roadmap they're using right now to try to do organizational transformation. And so people find a lot of value in it. And it's very simple. It's just simple problems to solve. And that's really the goal. It's not continuous delivery. It's if you solve these problems, your organization can't help but get better. It's the goal is to reduce burnout, improve the flow of delivery, right? And so solve these problems, and that happens.
And then what's the scaled agile DevOps maturity framework?
Okay, so for a little context behind that, I'm part of the Enterprise Dojo Consortium, where people who've been working to build dojos, because I started the Walmart dojo based off of the Verizon dojo, which was based off the Target dojo, and so we have all these people who've been working in dojos, and we had a conference in 2019, and Ross Clanton was there. He was co-founder of the Target dojo and founded the Verizon dojo, and we had a 3-day conference. And at the end of it, we started saying, okay, look, we've been talking to each other and helping each other. How do we help the broader community? And we started putting notes up and came up with some ideas. And at the end of it, I said, what we really need, though, is a scaling framework, right? And like everybody in there has the same opinion of the most well-known scaling framework. And they started throwing things at me. And then I'm at dinner, sitting next to Ross, having beer, and just out of nowhere, Ross says, Scaled Agile DevOps Maturity Framework, so you too can be a SADMF. And I went, that's brilliant. And I went home and registered the URL. And then, I don't know, a year and a half later, I had a break between jobs, and I started throwing content out there. And I've had a few other people throw content out there. If you supply content, you get the most desirable Scaled Agile DevOps accredited facilitator certification. But you can buy certifications as a Scaled Agile DevOps practitioner or a Scaled
SAD-MF.
Yeah, or you can be a SAD fellow. It's everything in there is a slightly twisted real thing that's actually happening in organizations today.
But like I have a suspicion you haven't been able to buy any boats yet.
I have not, but you'd be surprised. I think I've got revenue of about $300 since but it's absolutely, and actually I've got some people. The people in the Dojo Consortium, we've been kind of brainstorming some ideas how to add AI to it so we can be on par with our competition.
Oh, yeah.
And so I can version it from 2.6 to 3.0. I tell people that it's the one framework, to rule them all. And it gives you the same expected outcomes of something like Safe at a much lower price point.
Free, right?
Well, no, you have to be certified. I mean, come on.
Oh, okay.
Pay the certification. Otherwise, you're not a certified practitioner.
I feel like you should raise your prices so you could get your boat.
Yeah, people probably take it more seriously if I raise the prices. But I've also gotten feedback from people that's like, look, you really need to put a disclaimer on there because this is terrifyingly real.
And people are going to do it.
Yeah, and I've had other people rage.
People don't understand satire, my friend.
Yeah, I've had people rage at me because of what a massive anti-pattern it is. I'm like, yeah. So, and Michael Nygaard said it was the best technical satire he's seen in forever. A Comic Agile reference.
It made me smile.
So
with that, I'd just like to extend Ergonautics thanks for joining us. And like I said, we'll have you come back, and I'm sure we'll run into each other. Hopefully we can do it deliberately and share a meal or two. So thanks for coming and sharing this.
No, let me say it's a deep honor to be invited on. Thanks, Andrew. I really appreciate it.
Till next time.
Yep, absolutely.